Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'll be talking about what to expect when you take down your Sisterlocks. But before I begin, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of my lovely new subscribers. Thank you. Hello, this is Love Those Locks, the channel where I help you care for your hair, especially for the lady of a certain age. Do you want to change things up? Perhaps you want a different look, or maybe you're bored with your Sisterlocks, you just want to change, or perhaps you've reached your goal length, or you're fed up of the retightening schedule or self-retightening. Whatever your reasons are, you only can make the best decision for you based on what you want going forward. But in this video, I'm going to talk about 8 things that I think you should know and be prepared for when you take down your Sisterlocks, and they will be the 8 things that I wish I'd known before I took down my own Sisterlocks. Stay tuned. Number 1, the methods. So when it comes to taking down your Sisterlocks, there are 3 methods of doing that. The first method is shaving. Now, shaving is something that I did with my Sisterlocks. I had an undercut, so I had the back section shaved right down to the scalp. And the advantage with shaving is it's by far the fastest method. And the thing to consider with shaving, of course, as a disadvantage, is that once it's done and your hair is gone. An additional thing to think about with shaving is that if you have a small amount of hair left with the hair that's been shaved, you will have the pattern of the Sisterlock grid showing through your scalp. So it's well worth keeping that in mind. So that's the first method, shaving. The second method is unpicking, combing out, or undoing, which is all just different ways of saying the same thing. Now, with combing out, it's by far the longest way of taking down your Sisterlocks, but the advantage with it is that you will keep some of the length. You won't keep all of it because there will be shed hair, but you will keep some of the length, and it just means that you're not starting out from scratch. So unpicking, which would involve using a rat tooth comb or a pin, those are 2 things that I used when I unpicked the remaining 2/3 of my Sisterlocks. And the way that I did it was I got each individual Sisterlock, dipped it into water, and then smothered it with conditioner. And then what I'd do is, while I was working on one Sisterlock, then I'd dip 2 into the water and smother those with conditioner, and then wrap them in cling film or saran wrap while I was unpicking the other lock that I was working on. So the advantage is you'll retain length. The disadvantage with unpicking, apart from the time, is that the texture and condition of your hair will be ravaged by that process of unpicking. So the third way of taking down your Sisterlocks would be cutting. Now, with cutting, it depends what you then decide to do after you've cut it. And one thing with cutting is it may well be just that you want a new look, and that by cutting, maybe taking off 1/3 or half of the length, that once you do that, you decide to stick with the length that you have, and it means that it's not something that's completely irreversible like shaving. So the advantage with cutting is that it will just give you the option if you then decide to go the whole hog and take the rest of it off, or unpick it all, whichever of those options you decide to go for. So those are the 3 methods: shaving, unpicking, and cutting. So the second point to take into account when taking down your Sisterlocks is the time. Now, I touched briefly on the time when I was talking about the different methods. Now, with time, the method that takes the longest, as mentioned, is unpicking, undoing your Sisterlocks. Now, to give you an idea, to unpick one Sisterlock that was around 10 to 12 inches long took me 1 hour. And that hour started from the time that I literally started the unpicking process. It didn't include the dipping in the water and smothering with conditioner. So that was around 1 hour, a good hour. But if it was an extra small Sisterlock, or the hair was extra compacted, or it was a Sisterlock around the delicate hairline, that hour would rapidly expand into up to 2 hours. So that's something to take into account, the length of time. And overall, unpicking 2/3 of my head of Sisterlocks took me around 3 weeks. The other thing to consider when taking down your Sisterlocks using the combing out method is what sort of intermediary style you're going to have while you're doing it, because you won't be able to do it all in one sitting or in one day or 2 days. And as I say, it took me 3 weeks, around 3 weeks. And so what I did was I started with the Sisterlocks towards the back of my head. So remember, I had the back already shaved. So I started with the ones in the middle towards the back. And that meant that there was enough hair at the front and the sides so that I could tie my hair back into a ponytail. So that's a key thing to consider if you go for the combing out method. The third point to consider is the shedding when you take down your Sisterlocks. Now, when you unpick your Sisterlocks, there will be an unimaginable amount of shedding. Now, generally speaking, we lose around 100 strands of hair per day, and that's just natural shedding that would happen. So imagine over the length of time you've had your locks, or in my particular instance, I'd had my Sisterlocks for 3.5 years. So that's 3.5 years of hair that doesn't shed. So that shedding that hasn't happened, that will happen at the time that you unpick the Sisterlocks, plus the breakage that will happen while you're undoing it, and that's just something that will happen. So you will find that you will have a huge amount of hair. So that will be that volume of hair that you won't have. The fourth point to consider is the length. Now, if you unpick your Sisterlocks, you may be lucky enough to retain some of the length or a lot of the length. I did in my case. But what will happen over time is you will lose some of that length due to the weakness of the hair, so some of that will break off. And that's just something to keep in mind. The other thing that will happen with that length, although you will have the length all the way through from root to tip, you'll notice as you travel down a clump of hair from root to tip that overall the thinning of the body of hair is much more noticeable, and that's because the ends will have been ravaged from the combing out process. So although you may end up retaining a lot of your length, the thickness and quality of that hair may not be as you expect it to be. So something to keep in mind. The fifth point is weak hair. Now, you'll find that your hair will be very dry and weak when you comb out your Sisterlocks. I certainly remember having that, and in fact during the 3.5 years that I had my Sisterlocks, I didn't use any oil along the length of the lock, so the hair was extra dry. And also your hair has been in effect in that Sisterlock for X number of years, and so there will be an amount of dry hair. And the process of unpicking the Sisterlock will mean that the strands are ravaged by that process, which will contribute to the weakness, as well as the dryness contributing to the weakness. And what I found was I had to use a number of conditioning treatments just to bring my hair back up to par. So that's certainly something to bear in mind. But interestingly, one of the things that I wish I'd done at that time was to have cut off 1 to 2 inches of the length, and that may well have helped the hair to be in a better condition, and also I could have just saved myself the trouble of having those ravaged ends, which eventually would split up the hair shaft. 6, feeling like you have no hair. Now, believe it or not, when you take down your Sisterlocks, when you comb them out, it will feel as though you have no hair. Now, if you think about it, you go from a full thick head of Sisterlocks, and each of the locks is compacted hair that's compacted over time, which has added to the weight of each individual lock. Even if the locks are quite short, the hair is still compacted. So you go from that full thick of Sisterlocks through to combed out loose hair, and it really does feel as though you have no hair at all. 7, lack of movement. This may sound like a strange thing to mention, but it's actually tied to the feeling of having no hair. Now, if you think about it, as I mentioned in the last point, each individual Sisterlock is compacted hair that's compacted over time. the hair swells and then it compacts within each sister lock, which adds to the weight of it. So even if the sister locks are quite short, that weight contributes to the movement, and once you don't have the sister locks any longer, you don't have that movement. And it's interesting, it's not something that you'd think about beforehand, but you will notice it once your hair is loose again, and of course that's linked to that feeling of having no hair. Point 8. Back to daily or regular maintenance. Now, sister locks, as we know, is a low maintenance hairstyle. So after you've taken down your sister locks, whichever of the methods you use, you've then got the decision of what to do. Are you going to go for another low maintenance style such as micro locks or traditional locks? Or maybe you're going to go for something else, a relaxer, a weave, loose natural. But whatever it is, especially if you go for the other options that aren't low maintenance, you're then back into some form of regular maintenance regime, whether it's weekly or fortnightly, washing, conditioning, pre-poo, all of those sorts of things, or going to have your plaits done, or going for a relaxer retouch. So you're then back into a regular regime of looking after your hair. So ultimately the question is, if you take down your sister locks, what will you replace it with? Another set of sister locks? Something else that's low maintenance? Or something that will involve a hell of a lot more maintenance? Something to think about. That's it for today's video. Now, over to you. Are you thinking about taking down your locks? If so, please leave a comment below. I make videos every week, and to make sure you don't miss out, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any of the videos that I post. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and stay well. So that will be that volume of hair that you won't have. Stop.